Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca, and today I will be walking you through ACT practice test number 2, number 52 to 60. And so just for the sake of this demonstration, I'll be reading the whole thing, but typically I'll read sentence by sentence and match it with a question and see if I can answer the question as I'm reading it so that I can save time. But first, I'll read the passage. So here we go. I centered my scope where the nebula should be, inserted my lowest powered eyepiece, and leaned in to look. I just made out a dull smudge. I couldn't get much improvement even when I adjusted the focuser. Coincidentally, I switched to a higher power eyepiece and tried a trick I'd read about for viewing faint objects, using averted vision. The principle of averted vision states that the eye can often see distant objects better by looking to their one side rather than directly at them. I focused my eye on an area beside the smudge, and sure enough, my peripheral vision yielded far more of a better view of the nebula's swirling clouds. I even saw the trapezium star cluster, illuminated by 4 bright young stars nestled in the nebula like birds' eggs in a nest. Okay, so first I would read the question, which just asks if the word needs to be changed. So we have 4 choices. We have no change, similarly, besides, and so. So let me go to the sentence that has it, which is, coincidentally, I switched to a higher power eyepiece and tried a trick I read about for viewing faint objects using averted vision. And so in order to get the context for this sentence, I will look at the previous sentence, which says, I couldn't get much improvement even when I adjusted the focuser. Coincidentally, so then I'd match each of the word and see which one fits depending on the context. And so in this context, the narrator seems to be having trouble using the telescope and purposefully tries to fix the problem. The word coincidentally does not work because it implies an accidental action. So the word similarly also does not work because the narrator's action does not reference previous actions. And the word besides doesn't seem to fit either because it implies like an opposing force to the goal or an abandonment of the goal. And so the narrator is doing neither. Thus, the answer is not coincidentally, not similarly, not besides, and therefore it must be so. And if I plug this word back in to make it, let's see if it fits. So I couldn't get much improvement even when I adjusted the focuser. So I switched to a higher power eyepiece and tried a trick I'd read about for viewing faint objects using averted vision. And so this sentence logically makes sense now because it shows using the context, it shows the progression of what the narrator's actions are. So the questions typically go in chronological order. And so I realized that as I go down the questions, I will also be going down the passage. So first I'll look at the question to see if there's anything that I need to be looking out for. And so it looks like I need to check out for the verb, and I need to check out for any variations of things past the verb. And so let's read the sentence first. So coincidentally, I switched to a higher power eyepiece and tried a trick I'd read about for viewing faint objects using averted vision. And so it seems like the answer to this verb would be tried because the rest of the verbs in this sentence, such as switched, are past tense, and so therefore I do want to use a past tense verb to match with all the other verbs in this context. So I would cancel out C and D and then look for the difference between tried a trick I'd and tried a trick I'd have. And so in this case, tried a trick I'd, the I'd refers to I had. So that's also past tense, but tried a trick I'd have refers to tried a trick I would have. The contraction I'd is kind of special in this way, but just looking at the verb after it will be helpful to see if it's had or would. And so in this case, I'd read about, which is past tense. So therefore this I'd would be I had, and this have makes it present tense, so this would be I would have. And so I would choose no change because all of the verbs will be in past tense. Okay, so the next question also looks for a change. I noticed that the differences are quite distinct, and so I'd read the sentence first. So here we go. The principle of averted vision states that the eye can often see distances better by looking to their one side rather than directly at them. Okay, so it looks like we're going to change this part, and it said, I think it is, in this underlined phrase, it is helpful to like draw an arrow or like circle it to what exactly there is referring to. In general, it might be useful to always look for like where pronouns are referring to, since pronoun questions usually test if you know where it stems from. And so in this case, the pronoun there refers to the distant objects. So typically, it's good practice to just like draw from here to like the distant objects, so that you can see what you can remind yourself what it is referring to. And so thus we can eliminate J and H because so we can eliminate J because ones doesn't really mean one, doesn't really match with the plurality of the distant objects, and we can eliminate H because their side means they are side, which doesn't fit proper grammar. And we can eliminate choice F because it implies that they only have one side by saying they're one side, but the objects have more than one side. So therefore, choice G is correct because it refers to one side of the distant objects, and not that there's only one side of distant objects. Yes, and now we have this very typical question where it will ask if we should delete the sentence or keep it. And so, just for reference, preceding means previous and proceeding means following. So in this case, I would look at the question and look at the options, or just look at the question and see what it's asking. So the writer is considering deleting the preceding sentence, or the previous sentence, should the sentence be kept or deleted. So let's go to where 55 is, and it says the previous sentence. So the principle of averted vision states that the eye can often see distant objects better by looking to their one side rather than directly at them. I focused my eye on an area beside the smudge, and sure enough, my peripheral vision yielded far more of a better view of the nebulous swirling clouds. And so I read the second sentence to get the context for the first, and also to see if I need this first sentence to to build on the second sentence. And so the preceding sentence, which is the previous sentence, that we're looking to see if we should keep or delete, it seems that we should keep it because it describes what averted vision is and how it can help the narrator just see the nebula. And so I can cancel out C and D because it's kept. And so now the question lies, where is the reason? And what is the reason for keeping it? And so kept because it elaborates on why the narrator is capable of using averted vision when looking at the night sky, or kept because it explains the principle that clearly allowed the narrator to see the nebula more clearly. And so the answer here is B, because it doesn't really elaborate on why the narrator is capable of using averted vision, because it doesn't really talk about why the narrator is capable. It just says the narrator used averted vision in order to see the nebula more clearly. And so that's why the answer for here should be B. And so on to number 56. So first I'll look at the question. It looks like we want to see a change. Okay, so the sentence reads, I focused my eye on an area beside the smudge, and sure enough, my peripheral vision yielded far more of a better view of the nebulous swirling clouds. And so the word better already shows a comparison between the previous view and the current view. So we don't need the word more, and we don't need any more comparison words. So we don't need the word more, and we don't need a farther, which implies a comparison. So we can cancel out F and G, and therefore we now only consider A far and A far with a comma. And so I would just plug this in. So sure enough, my peripheral vision yielded a far better view of the nebulous swirling clouds. That sounds fine. Okay, that was H. And now I'm going to plug in J to see how it sounds. Sure enough, my peripheral vision yielded a far better view of the nebulous swirling clouds. And so it seems like H is a correct answer because a far will not point to anything, whereas the far in here will point to the word better. So it improves the word better, but in this case, a far cannot stand on its own. In another sense, you can consider it as if you like keep the comma, it'll be separate, right? And so you can say a far view and a better view, because the comma separates the two adjectives. But that isn't right, because a view cannot be like a far. So therefore the answer would be H. So this looks like a vocabulary question. Usually for these, if a word that you know fits, I will use that word instead, and like not bank on a different word. Like if I don't know the word emanated and I know that illuminated would work for this case, then I would choose the word illuminated and I would not like consider emanated. Unless I know that all like the rest of the words that I know don't fit, then I would like consider the words that I do not know. So in this case, it looks like there's 4 choices: illuminated, emanated, emulated, and eliminated. So let's see. I even saw the trapezium star cluster, illuminated by 4 bright young stars nestled in the nebula like birds' eggs in a nest. And so it seems that they do emit light, so stars do emit light, so we can use the word illuminated here. But let's see why the other answers are not correct. And so in this context, it doesn't make sense for the stars to copy or emulate, since there is no mention of copying anything in this paragraph. Also, they do not eliminate anything because they don't delete anything. And additionally, emanated doesn't work because they do emit light, but the word emanated means emit, but they do not emit star clusters. And so the correct answer here would be A. So looking at number 58, we have 4 choices: birds' eggs, plural, birds' eggs, 1 bird, birds' eggs in H, no possessives, and J, bird eggs, which implies that the eggs own something. So immediately I cross out H and J because H doesn't have any possessives and J has the wrong possessive, which is eggs. The eggs don't own anything. So that's why that would be wrong. And so immediately we go to check to see the difference. And so we have birds' eggs, plural birds, and birds' eggs, singular bird. In this case, it's just a phrase. So the phrase would be birds' eggs, plural, because I think the phrase goes that like many birds will have many eggs, rather than 1 bird having many eggs. So number 59 is a bit longer, but it implies that we should have read like the rest of the passage already, And so here's the question. Given that all the following statements are true, which one, if added here, would best conclude the paragraph and the essay by referring back to the opening paragraph? A. Observing these features made my winter trek outdoors worthwhile, teaching me that a change in focus is sometimes helpful to see more clearly. B. In addition to averted vision, it is also important to eliminate stray light and use the correct magnification when observing the night sky. Part C, or question C, or answer C. Although my initial goal was to observe Orion's belt and sword, the constellation is also very useful as an aid to locationing other constellations such as Taurus and Gemini. D. The trapezium star cluster was originally discovered in 1617 by Galileo, whom I read about extensively in my astronomy books. So, answers B, C, and D all introduce new knowledge, which typically we don't want to do in conclusions, so therefore the answer must be A. The reason why I know that B is new information is because it says in addition to averted vision, C because it talks about Taurus and Gemini and the other constellations, and D because it talks about Galileo. So therefore the answer must be A. It conclusively ends the passage without introducing new information. So the last question asks about the passage as a whole. So it says, suppose the writer's goal had been to write an essay about a personal experience with astronomy. Would this essay accomplish that goal? And so we have 2 yeses and 2 nos. So first of all, we would cancel out either yes or no. And so in this case, yes, it is a personal experience because it is a narrative, meaning that like it's spoken about in first person. And so I could cancel out the 2 no's and not even look at the reasons. In the case that I don't know which one it is, then I would start looking at the reasons. But it's important to realize that like sometimes the correct reason will be given to the incorrect answer, and so that's just important to look for. But in this case, we know that it's yes, because it is a narrative. So here we go. So F. Yes, because the narrator recounts several past adventures and challenges of using the telescope to view the night sky. Or G. Yes, because the narrator describes a stargazing session from start to finish, from setting up the telescope to observing an actual constellation. And so it looks like the narrator doesn't really talk about past adventures or challenges. She only talks about one challenge, and she doesn't talk about past adventures. And so therefore the answer must be G.